There are people who change history gradually, over decades, carefully, one step at a time. And there are those who burst into it like a fire, fast, bright, and gone just as quickly. Johann Friedrich Struensee was the second kind. To understand how a provincial German doctor became the de facto ruler of Denmark and was then publicly executed before 30,000 people, you need to start not with him. You need to start with the king. Christian VII ascended the Danish throne in 1766 at the age of 17. On paper, a young monarch with a brilliant education, absolute power, and an entire kingdom ahead of him. In reality, a man whom reality was already struggling to hold. He talked to himself. He struck servants without reason, then wept with remorse. He could, in the middle of an official reception, suddenly lose the thread of what was happening and stare into empty space with the expression of someone hearing something the rest of the room could not. Modern historians debate the diagnosis: schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, severe depression with psychotic episodes. There is no definitive answer and likely never will be. But the fact remains. By the time Struensee entered his life, Christian VII was king in title only. He could not govern. Perhaps he knew this. Perhaps that is precisely why he trusted so completely the one man at court who did not seem afraid of him. Struensee was born in 1737 in Halle, a city in eastern Germany known for its university and its traditions of Protestant Enlightenment. His father was a pastor, a devout and strict man, but not a narrow one. The house where Johann Friedrich grew up was a house of books, of debate, of ideas. Ideas about reason being capable of improving the world. That laws should serve people, not the other way around. That superstition, cruelty, and arbitrary power were not inevitable features of human life, but problems that could and should be solved. He studied medicine, earned his degree, practiced in Altona, a small city that at the time fell under Danish jurisdiction. He was a good doctor, attentive, well-read, resistant to the quackery that was abundant in the medicine of his day. But medicine was a tool for him, not a calling. The calling was ideas. Voltaire, Rousseau, Montesquieu. He read them voraciously and believed every word. In 1768, the Danish court was looking for a physician to accompany the king on a grand European tour. Struensee got the position. No one at the time could have imagined where it would lead. His first months at court, he was nobody. The royal physician, an important post, but not a powerful one. He treated, he observed, he stayed quiet, and he watched everything around him with the professional interest of a man accustomed to making diagnoses. The diagnosis for the Danish court required no particular insight. The aristocracy lived in its own sealed world, detached from the reality of the country in roughly the way a planet is detached from a star, orbiting nearby, lit by it, but never touching. Peasants were serfs. Censorship strangled any free expression. Torture was a legally sanctioned instrument of criminal investigation. Corruption was not an exception to the rules. It was the rules. And over all of this sat a sick young king who could not and would not change anything because he barely had the strength to remain present in the room. Struensee saw all of it, and he had a plan. Not immediately, not from the first day. But gradually, as the king grew increasingly attached to his physician, the only man at court who spoke to him plainly, without ceremony, without fear, without concealed agendas, Struensee understood that he possessed something rare, something people kill and die for, the trust of an absolute monarch. The question was, what to do with it? Queen Caroline Matilda entered this story earlier than most people assume. She was 15 years old when she married Christian VII. An English princess, sister of the future George III, she arrived in Copenhagen with that particular mixture of youthful idealism and complete ignorance of what awaited her that is only possible at 15. Her husband was strange, unpredictable, at times frightening. The Danish court received her coldly. She was foreign, young, not sufficiently important. She bore a son, an heir, and a daughter. She fulfilled her official function and found herself utterly alone in an enormous palace, surrounded by people who did not trust her and whom she could not trust. Struensee became her physician, then her confidant, then her friend, and then something happened that under other circumstances would have been simply a human story about two lonely people finding each other. But this was an 18th century royal court. Nothing here was simply a human story. Their relationship became a fact, or at least became what everyone believed to be a fact, which in politics is often more consequential than truth itself. Struensee's enemies had their weapon. They kept it. They waited for the right moment. While they waited, Struensee acted. In September 1770, he was appointed Privy Cabinet Minister with the authority to sign royal decrees without the approval of the State Council. This was unprecedented. By the standards of the Danish aristocracy, it was almost obscene. A German, a doctor, without lineage, without land, without connections. And suddenly, the de facto ruler of the most radical reform experiment of the 18th century. In under 2 years, Struensee issued more than 1,000 decrees. More than 1,000. That is roughly 1.5 decrees per day, including weekends. He abolished censorship, completely without qualification, giving the Danish press a freedom it had never known. He banned torture. He curtailed aristocratic rights to serf labor. He introduced the principle that state positions should be held by competent people rather than simply people with the right ancestry. He reformed the criminal justice system. He abolished numerous privileges that the nobility considered their natural birthright simply because those privileges had existed for a long time. He did all of this quickly, perhaps too quickly. Perhaps he understood that his time was limited, that the window of opportunity, opened by the king's illness and his own influence over him, would not stay open forever. Perhaps he was simply a man to whom ideas came more naturally than politics, who knew how to think but not how to wait. The pace of reform alienated everyone. The aristocracy, because the reforms were directed against it. The church, because Struensee was a man of the Enlightenment who regarded religious institutions with a cold rationalism they experienced as contempt. Ordinary people, because the changes came too fast, too opaquely, without explanation and without preparation. He built no coalitions. He sought no allies. He simply issued decrees and believed that was enough. This was his greatest mistake. Not his only one, but his greatest. The conspiracy ripened slowly, as conspiracies that are later called inevitable usually do. It was organized by the Dowager Queen Juliane Marie, Christian VII's stepmother, an intelligent, patient woman who possessed that particular quality which separates successful court conspirators from unsuccessful ones. She knew how to wait. Beside her stood her son, Prince Frederick, and Count Enevold Brandt, a man whom Struensee himself had once brought into the king's circle. Betrayal from within, a classic of the genre. They gathered evidence. They made plans. They waited for a moment when the king would be sufficiently vulnerable, sufficiently unstable, to be persuaded to sign what needed to be signed. With a mentally ill king, this was not as difficult as it might sound. Particularly if you came to him at night, particularly if he had just returned from a masquerade and was already in a state where reality was not entirely accessible. The night of January 16th to 17th, 1772. Juliane Marie entered the king's chambers at 3 in the morning. Her people were with her. She told Christian about Struensee's betrayal, about his relationship with the Queen, about how he had exploited royal trust, about treason. Christian listened. Christian signed the arrest warrant. By morning, it was over. Struensee was arrested at dawn. Caroline Matilda, several hours later. She was a queen. She could not simply be arrested. Charges were needed. Procedures, the appearance of law. The appearance of law was created with remarkable speed. The investigation lasted several months. Struensee held out. He denied the relationship with the Queen. Then he broke. Historians disagree about what exactly broke him. Threats, isolation, or something more subtle. The realization that the game was over and that confession would change nothing except, perhaps, the terms of the ending. He confessed to everything. The relationship with the Queen, high treason, everything they required. Caroline Matilda denied the charges to the end. It did not save her, but it may have saved her life. As an English princess and sister of the British king, she was too significant a figure to be dealt with as Struensee was dealt with. She was sent into exile to Chell Castle in northern Germany. There she died 3 years later at the age of 23. Officially, of typhoid fever. Of what in reality? A question to which history offers no definitive answer. The sentence against Struensee was handed down in April 1772. Death, but not simply death. Death as a message, as a demonstration, as an answer to all those 1,000 decrees, to all the audacity of a man who had dared to believe that reason mattered more than birth. April 28th, 1772. Copenhagen. 30,000 people gathered in the square. First, they cut off his right hand, the one that had signed the decrees. Then his head. Then the body was quartered. The parts were displayed publicly, on wheels in full view of the crowd, the way it was done in the Middle Ages, the way it was done with traitors and heretics, as though there had been no reforms, no Enlightenment, no 1,000 decrees. He was 30. Johann Friedrich Struensee lived 34 years. He governed a country for less than 2. He issued more than 1,000 decrees. He was publicly executed with demonstrative brutality that was itself a political statement. History remembered him. That is not the same as victory. But it is not defeat either. It is simply history, with all its complexity, its injustice, and its strange, slow logic that cannot be understood from inside the moment. Only later, only from a distance, only when the wheels have long since been taken down and the ideas are still alive.